Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we discussed how Rimuru agreed to Guy's request, planning to infiltrate the Empire with an elite squad to turn the tables. Meanwhile, back at the Monster Federation, Demon Lord Guy seemed to have noticed something unusual, and Velzard, the sister of Storm Dragon Veldora, also wanted to have a serious conversation with her brother. In this video, we'll talk about how Lord of Wisdom tricked Guy into giving away 500,000 souls and delve into the tragic childhood of Storm Dragon. Let's get started. Normally, after Rimuru boldly declared his intention to counterattack the Empire, the meeting should have come to an end. However, Guy showed no signs of leaving, instead intently sensing something. After a moment, as if discovering something fascinating, Guy turned his attention to Rimuru. Before Rimuru could react, Guy suddenly questioned why Diablo had evolved from a demon peer to the highest rank of Devil King. Guy then realized that not only Diablo, but many others within the labyrinth had also awakened as true demon lords. Guy demanded an explanation from Rimuru. Although Guy asked with a smile, his eyes bore no traces of amusement. He wasn't going to let Rimuru off easily for once again disrupting the balance of the world. Caught off guard, Rimuru didn't know how to explain and looked desperately at Lord of Wisdom for help. However, Lord of Wisdom remained calm, advising Rimuru to simply say that this was the effect of his Lord of Gluttony, Beelzebub, converting souls back into energy and granting it to those eligible for awakening, thus forcing their evolution. Following this advice, Rimuru repeated these words to Guy. Guy, upon hearing this, seemed to recall something similar. Like Rimuru, Guy had also attempted to awaken his subordinates Misery and Rain by giving them around 10,000 souls each. However, it was evident that there were no signs of awakening, as if the effort had been entirely fruitless. Upon hearing this, Lord of Wisdom provided an explanation. For magents like Benimaru, Cheyenne, or even Misery, who had been named by a higher being, their very nature undergoes a change, severing their path to independent evolution. Therefore, without the correct method, whether receiving souls from others or earning them through battle, they cannot awaken. And it seems, only Lord of Wisdom might know this correct method. Guy had an epiphany and then made a request to Rimuru, asking for assistance in awakening the two primordial demons, Misery and Rain. Rimuru fell into contemplation upon hearing this. Although Guy framed it as a request, there was no real room for Rimuru to refuse, especially considering Rimuru's current position and the difficulty of opposing Guy directly. However, Rimuru saw no harm in it. Since he had decided to align with Guy against the Empire, expanding his own side's strength was reasonable. The only concern was how many souls would be required for the awakening. Rimuru, having already awakened 9 of his subordinates, was left with only about 100,000 souls, clearly insufficient for the awakening of other subordinates. Rimuru then inquired with Lord of Wisdom and was informed that 500,000 souls would be needed. Rimuru was shocked at the sheer number required but realized the necessity of this amount, especially since it was for the awakening of someone else's subordinates, and it was Lord of Wisdom's assessment. Thinking so, Rimuru relayed this requirement to Guy, who readily agreed and handed over the 500,000 souls. Rimuru explained to Guy that the awakening process would lead to a state known as the Harvest Festival, involving several days of slumber. Therefore, he would prepare rooms for Misery and Rain, suggesting that Guy and Miss Velzard could return home in the meantime. After receiving the souls, although Lord of Wisdom suggested only showcasing the power of Lord of Gluttony, Rimuru didn't plan to reveal his full capabilities in front of Guy. Thus, he cautiously urged Guy and his company to depart soon. However, Guy maintained an air of nonchalance, asserting that he would take them back himself. Clearly, Guy's aim was to observe Rimuru's capabilities. In this mutual exchange of smiles, a fierce psychological battle was unfolding beneath the surface. Just then, the door burst open. Storm Dragon Veldora and Ramrus rushed in, urgently reporting that the command center surveillance feed had gone offline and requested Rimuru's assistance in restoring it. Ramrus, too, mentioned their monitoring of global developments, completely oblivious to the room's tense atmosphere. As mentioned in episode 32, Rimuru, utilizing his magical Eye of God, had devised a satellite-like magical device capable of real-time ground observation. Veldora and Rimuru, when idle, often used this ability to roam the skies and enjoy the world's scenery, leading to the magic's eventual depletion. Before Rimuru could reprimand Storm Dragon Veldora, his elder sister stepped forward to greet them. Veldora, seeing his big sister, became instantly flustered and incoherently questioned why she was there. Velzard calmly remarked that she had hoped Veldora might have matured somewhat but found he was still as noisy and boisterous as ever. However, she also expressed relief at seeing Veldora so lively immediately after being unsealed. Veldora remained tense and shyly expressed his happiness at seeing his sister in good spirits. The atmosphere grew tense once again as Veldora faced his sister, Velzard. Velzard wore a gentle expression, while Veldora, in contrast, was visibly sweating. Velzard mentioned it had been a long time since she last saw her brother and had much to catch up on. Veldora, panic-stricken, hastily declined, insisting his sister must be busy and he had duties to attend to. Velzard, smiling, noted that Guy and Rimuru seemed to be in for a long discussion, making it a perfect opportunity for a leisurely chat with her brother. Velzard deliberately emphasized the word leisurely and asked Rimuru to borrow a room nearby. Upon hearing this, Veldora looked desperately towards Rimuru for help, but Rimuru could only return a sympathetic glance to the storm dragon, nodding weakly in agreement to Velzard's request. Veldora's face momentarily bore an expression of utter despair, but he quickly grabbed hold of Rimuru, muttering please not to leave him alone. The scene made it clear to all present that Veldora was utterly uncomfortable, if not outright terrified, of Velzard. Rimuru, attempting to ease the awkwardness, asked Veldora if he found it difficult to get along with Miss Velzard. Veldora, feigning bravado, claimed there was nothing he wasn't good at. Rimuru was left with no choice but to step back, while Velzard cheerfully played along with Veldora's charade, recalling how she had cared for him since birth. Velzard recounted how, after Veldora's chaotic birth, she swiftly subdued him, then forced him to reincarnate. If he caused trouble after reincarnating, she would seal his movements and gently reprimand him. Velzard reminisced about the past with a matter-of-fact tone, explaining that Veldora, who initially couldn't transform into a human form, often caused extensive destruction and needed stern discipline to manage. Velzard casually described her past actions, highlighting the truly indestructible nature of true dragons, where part of their memory and personality could be reset upon reincarnation. For Velzard, this was a convenient method to discipline the unruly Veldora. By eliminating and reincarnating him, she could reset aspects of his personality and start anew with his education, a physical form of amnesia therapy. Speaking of Veldora's sisters, we must mention his second sister, Scorched Dragon Velgrynd. Like her elder sister, Velgrynd was a loving and caring sister, albeit a tad gentler in her approach. She preferred to teach Veldora through language, patiently imparting life skills and knowledge. In instances where Veldora was beyond reason, Velgrind's method of reprimand was to beat him to a near-death state. Thus, Veldora's life was marked by considerable hardship, and his frequent misbehavior might well have been a reaction to his stifled upbringing. Rimuru hastened to assure Velzard that the storm dragon was now very well behaved. He gently interjected that educating Veldora shouldn't always involve physical force. Sincere communication was also essential, as Veldora was capable of understanding and responding to heartfelt words. Upon hearing Rimuru's suggestion, Velzard fell briefly silent before sighing and nodding in agreement. She admitted she had never truly listened to Veldora's thoughts and aspirations, seeing this as an opportune moment to have an in-depth conversation with him. Resigned to his fate, Veldora ceased resisting, pleading with his sister to be merciful as he reluctantly accompanied her to an adjacent room, tightly clutching Rimurus's hand. Once the door closed behind them, what transpired within remained a mystery to all outside. Rimuru silently prayed for the storm dragon's well-being and turned his attention back to Guy, hoping to send him away. He mentioned that Miss Velzard seemed to have a lengthy discussion ahead and assured Guy that he would prepare rooms for Velzard, Misery, and Rain, suggesting that Guy could confidently return home. Guy showed no intention of leaving, expressing his desire to stay and enjoy the tempura he had heard about earlier. Faced with this request, Rimuru had no choice but to comply. While this might expose some of his abilities, Rimuru decided it was better not to provoke Guy. Just as he was silently resolving himself to this, Diablo, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke up. He cheerfully suggested that Guy was planning to stay and that he had many things to discuss with him. Diablo was particularly keen to hear more about Guy's much bragged about ultimate skill. Guy seemed flustered, evidently at a loss in dealing with Diablo. Diablo quickly turned the tables, and Guy found himself completely overpowered. Seizing the opportunity, Rimuru suggested that Diablo take Guy to the cabinet hall for a thorough chat. Diablo thanked Rimuru and, placing his hand on Guy's shoulder, began to lead an uncooperative Guy away from the scene. Once Guy was out of the picture, Rimuru immediately proceeded to infuse souls into Misery and Rain, triggering their evolution. Lord of Wisdom cheerfully announced that the evolution was successful with the expenditure of 200,000 souls, 100,000 for each. Rimuru panicked. How did the required 500,000 souls become 200,000? He feared that Lord of Wisdom had deceived Guy. Sweat broke out inside Rimuru's mind. Lord of Wisdom calmly clarified that the count also included the amounts needed for Testarossa, Ultima, and Carrera. Rimuru was speechless, worrying about the repercussions if Guy discovered the deceit. However, Lord of Wisdom reassured him that there was no problem and that the remaining souls could be considered a fee. Rimuru was at a loss for words, considering that deceiving the most powerful demon lord could have catastrophic consequences. Amidst his internal turmoil, Rimuru realized he had no choice but to go along with the situation he had inadvertently created. Resignedly, he acted as if nothing was amiss, informing Misery and Rain of their successful evolution. That evening, the Monster Federation hosted another grand banquet. Upon seeing Diablo again, he appeared to be full of life and vigor, in stark contrast to Guy, who seemed utterly exhausted. Despite this, Guy expressed his gratitude to Rimuru for the successful evolution. Velzard, on the other hand, was in high spirits, happily stating her intention to visit again for more heart-to-heart talks with her brother. However, Veldora was conspicuously absent. Rumor had it that he had engaged in a duel with Velzard within the labyrinth, and was soundly defeated, now resting quietly while recovering from his injuries. Veldora, ever the braggart, claimed he had held back and would show no mercy next time. However, it was clear to all that even as true dragons, Veldora was no match for his sister. Velzard seemed to have been playing rather than fighting seriously, deepening Rimuru's respect and understanding of the true power of the true dragons. This prompted him to start devising strategies to handle Velgrynd, Veldora's formidable second sister. With these thoughts in mind, Rimuru continued to enjoy the ongoing festivities of the banquet. At that very moment, in the distant Eastern Empire, Scorched Dragon Velgrynd was immersed in contemplation. She pondered over the long-standing game wagering the world's supremacy, a duel between the original demon Lord Guy and the first hero, Rudra. To Velgrynd, such a game seemed lackluster, even pointless. She had once thought that a direct confrontation between these two would suffice to determine the victor. But the reality was different. Guy and Rudra had engaged in numerous direct battles, each ending in a stalemate. Thus, this world-scale game had evolved into a contest of manipulating their respective chess pieces for victory. Velgrynd, however, remained dissatisfied with the current state of affairs. She believed the game was skewed against Rudra. Among Guy's pieces, only Frost Dragon Velzard had the capability to defeat Rudra. Conversely, only Scorched Dragon Velgrynd could pose a threat to Guy. Yet, she was convinced that defeating Guy was an enormously challenging task, her only option being to battle Velzard. Their opposing elements of ice and fire could lead to mutual destruction. Despite the true dragon's ability to resurrect, Velgrynd harbored a deep fear of death, not wanting her love for Rudra to vanish into oblivion. It surprised her how tenaciously she clung to such a seemingly trivial emotion as love, leading her to scoff at herself while strategizing to avoid such a dire outcome. Her thoughts then turned to her younger brother, Storm Dragon Veldora. Velgrynd was irked by him. The original plan was for the million-strong invading army to provoke Veldora into causing chaos, providing an opportunity to bring him under control and potentially awaken a few containers for Rudra's ultimate skill. But the reality had drastically deviated from her expectations. Learning of the war's outcome from Rudra left Velgrynd speechless. The total annihilation of the million-man army was shocking, especially since even Rudra was unable to grasp the specifics. Rudra's eyes brimmed with discontent as he recounted everything to Velgrynd, from the disastrous defeat in Dworgen Nation to the final obliteration of the army by nuclear magic. Contrary to expectations, Veldora had not participated in the battle. Instead, four primordial demons had single-handedly decimated the entire force. Rudra, with a wry smile, acknowledged the irony of his situation. Years of accumulating military power had been unexpectedly thwarted by an entity he had previously disregarded, the emerging demon Lord Rimuru. Not only did Rimuru manage to enlist 4 primordial demons, but even Ramorous and Storm Dragon Veldora had started assisting this demon lord. This unforeseen turn of events left both Velgrynd and Rudra in a rare state of astonishment. After a brief moment of contemplation, they regained their composure. Velgrynd mused that had she been able to tame Veldora directly, she wouldn't have had to labor so hard until now. Perhaps it was time to seek some insights directly from Demon Lord Rimuru himself. Rudra agreed, affirming the need to hear it straight from Rimuru. Velgrynd, delighted to find Rudra sharing her view, chuckled as Rudra made his final decision. He declared that they should act immediately. The more their plans unraveled, the more careless Guy would become. A character like Guy would surely think Rudra was waiting for the next opportunity. Velgrind's spirits lifted with this revelation. The prolonged wait was finally coming to an end. Those who defied Rudra, whether they were primordial demons or the rebellious Yuki, would soon pay dearly for their arrogance. Both started conspiring about their next moves, and then Velgrynd rose. This was her first real action in thousands of years, setting in motion a tragic event known as the Purge of the Red Lotus. Alright, that's all for this video. In the next episode, we will delve into Yuki Kagurazaka's plans for the Imperial coup, the enigmatic Damrata, and the fiercely loyal Tatsuya Kondo, who stands unwaveringly by Rudra's side. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.